Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about good software practices. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how can I figure out if a company is following good software development practices before joining? You have to know what that is and then know how to ask about it. That's pretty much it. And based on that you are asking me, I'm assuming that you might not be at that stage just yet, which is the thing that is sort of difficult. But this is, well, to me, it's sort of maybe this thought helps a little bit, guys. So I know that there is this. Because we live in a world where everybody wants to be the best at everything, and you sort of think about things in terms of comparison to something else, where you compare the best car, for example, to the second best car, and you actually emotionally, you cognitively understand that there is a better version of this thing here, but being second best, that's sort of undesirable for you, but yet it's still a vast improvement over a lot of other situations you could be in. And if you look at everything that way, you always end up more with in my opinion, a religious mindset around how to pick your tools, how to pick basically anything that you buy or do, or so forth and so forth. And it always comes down to the same thing: am I emotionally convinced that this is the best that I can do? And that is, in my opinion, it's a very coarse way of looking at things. It's not really high definition. The way that I try to make people sort of think about this, or like that's the way I find it to be useful, is that this is the current iteration that offers certain benefits of doing something in a certain way. That sounds very fluffy, but imagine this, guys. So as industry progresses, things get more and more advanced. The things that we do today are going to be outdated. There's like going to be new. I'm not just talking software here. We can talk about anything. Like if you look at just say cars, for example. Like if you go back a few years, the cars by those days standards, like today they're sort of outdated, but they were top of the line at one point. And then you can go even further back. It's the same thing with your own process, where if you think about yourself as a continuing, like just a continually improving, well, person or like entity, you start to think less in terms of, okay, good software practices, and you stop thinking in terms of what is useful, if that makes sense. Because good software practices, these are things that we used to do things in a certain way, and then we have found better ways of doing that. And it's only when you understand where we came from, why we did things in a certain way, and why we stopped doing it and started doing things in a new way, where you start to understand what good practices are and what the next thing is going to be. Because it's always just it's a continuing flow of improvements, if that makes sense. So when you go to a software company, as a classic example, if someone asks you how to or I wouldn't say this is not a classic example, but an example would be if you are in a situation where you need to heat yourself up, that you need to warm yourself up because you're cold or something like that. Well, are you going to argue with someone about that you need, I don't know, central heating or something like that? Well, if you go far back enough, there was a time when a fire would make sense, and I hope that still makes sense, because if you're in the jungle or like in the forest or wherever, right, making a fire will do the trick. It's just that we found better ways of doing things as our society continued growing, and it's the same thing with you. So when you go and talk to a company about like, are they using good software practices, unless you know for a fact what a bad practice looks like, how would you ask that? How would you even determine it? Because this is the problem with people who have this sort of idea that they know what's good and they know what's bad, when they actually don't base that on knowledge. They base that on like just something they've been told. As I was saying with the fire thing, if you ask me what is an effective way of warming yourself up? My response would be, it depends, because as I said, I look at warming myself up as a complex problem where there are many solutions to that problem, and I do so because I've been cold more than once in many situations, if that makes sense. It's the same thing with losing weight or like whatever you might be doing, right? There are many answers to this question, and the same thing goes for here. So this is why it's very annoying to people who are fairly experienced to hear a junior software developer ask about, or are you using microservices, as an example, because in their mind using microservices is the same thing as good software practices. But the reality is that the microservice is a way of doing things. I mean, I'm not going to make the argument that older is better per se, because, and classic one is that, I mean, we've found better ways of treating serious diseases, or taking care of the environment and so forth, because there are practices that we just found that when we discovered them we didn't know any better, and now we know better, and so we're not going to go back. But then there are, as I said, then there are practices that are still very much viable, they still work, and if you truly understand what a good practice is and how to achieve goals, and you understand, as I like to say, the problem that you are solving, then you have no issues with using a pattern that may not be the most trendy things, because newer is not always better. I'm not trying to say that that you shouldn't update things. I'm saying that you have to think about what you're doing, because as with the fire, if you don't have central heating options in the middle of the woods, well, then the only way for you to heat yourself is by using something like a fire, or like cuddling together for body warmth, or so forth and so forth. You just think about it that way, and you stop thinking in terms of like this religious way of thinking, where because this is the classic one, like everybody always asks me what is the best programming language, and I kind of go, what are you gonna do? Because if you ask me that question, that basically means that you don't understand what matters at all. You have no experience, and that's okay. But that's the number one problem, and that's why I was saying to you at the beginning of this little rant of mine, that the way that you figure it out is that you ask questions in an interview, but you have to know what a good practice looks like. And I find it difficult to believe that you asking me where you don't have any you don't basically have any chance of figuring that out. But that's okay. Because just as I was saying, as society has grown and evolved into doing things in a better way, you have to go through the same process. Take what you know now about good practices, such as, let's just say for the sake of argument that you know that you should be writing unit tests. Okay, maybe that is the scope of all you know about good practices around testing, and then just ask about that. And then join that company, and then after a while of working, because they might say yes, and you join and you realize that there's a million other things that are really, really shit in this company. And then after a while you join the next company, and now you have more questions to ask. And then you join that company, and you repeat that process until you reach a point where you're so experienced that, well, your gut feeling is going to tell you one thing, and you're going to be able to create pose very, very good questions that are going to answer that's going to answer this question for you very effectively, which is the sign of, incidentally, a senior software developer. That's how you know how someone is following good practices before joining. And not always, because sometimes you are wrong as well, and someone is doing something smarter than what you are aware of. And yeah, let's not even go into that one. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way you figure out if a company is following good software development practices before joining it is asking questions in the interview, and knowing what to ask about, and knowing how to interpret the answer. Because this is the one I give you for free if you're a junior software developer. If you ask about unit testing, do you do unit testing, as an example, 99% of the companies are going to say yes. And then you get into the company and you realize that they don't actually do that as seriously as you might think. It's sort of like, a dictatorship saying that they for sure have democracy. It's just that you don't get to vote, and they are president for life. But if you ask them, they have democracy. It's a democracy or something like that. It's the same deal, right? Your definition really makes all the difference when we talk about what you are thinking about and what they are thinking about when answering your question. And this is what you do over and over. You continuously learn. As I was saying, you start with fire because you don't know a better way of warming yourself up. So you sit with that thing for a few hundred years, you grow as a species, and then you realize that, hey, maybe there's other ways of making yourself warm, and then you evolve. And you're going to do the same thing. And the only way to evolve is to try, based on what you know right now, learn from it, and repeat. That's the solution. Have a great day.